Welcome to The Night Visitors, where we share purportedly true accounts of interactions with vampires and other supernatural predators. I'm James, a paranormal researcher and lifelong vampire enthusiast, coming to you from Transylvania. Tonight's story comes to us from Toronto and occurred sometime in the mid-1980s in that city's Jamaican community. I first heard this account from a Jamaican coworker named Eleanor, with whom I worked the overnight shift at a grocery store on Cape Cod in the early 2000s. One night in the break room, I was reading a book of vampire stories, and Eleanor saw the cover featuring an image of Ingrid Pitt from the film The Vampire Lovers baring her fangs, and she commented, "So you're into that type of thing? I have a true story about a vampire." What follows is the account that Eleanor shared that hot July night at 3 o'clock in the morning. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the people involved. Elizabeth was from St. Catherine's Parish, Jamaica, and was only 19 years old when she married Neville, and only after the wedding did she find out that he was truly a wicked man. There were other women in his life, and he preferred to spend his money on alcohol and good times rather than household expenses. Neville was also an Obeah man who used his talents for dark and malicious purposes. Obeah is the general term given to the African diasporic spiritual traditions practiced in much of the English-speaking Caribbean. Unlike Vodou in Haiti or Regla de Ocha in Cuba, Obeah is not a highly codified religion with an established priesthood and initiatory rituals, but rather a loose collection of beliefs and practices passed down through oral tradition. It comes mainly from West Africa, but also includes elements of South Asian and Native Caribbean religions. Obeah can be used for good, but has developed a reputation of being dark and sinister, and in many places its practice has been criminalized. Neville was known to practice a particularly malevolent form of Obeah, and clients would come to consult him to place curses and seek revenge on their enemies. In the early 80s, driven by economic necessity, Elizabeth and Neville emigrated to Toronto, where there was a large and thriving Jamaican community. There, Neville's Obeah practice flourished, and many wealthy Canadians of all cultural backgrounds sought his services, paying exorbitant fees for him to work his evil magic. As his fame grew, Neville became more fanatical in his service to the spirits. He erected an altar in the kitchen of their apartment to a Duppy, or spirit named Winston. This nefarious shrine consisted of graveyard dirt, sticks, animal bones, and a cloth doll representing Winston that Neville had sewn himself. This particular Duppy, Neville claimed, was an old man who had died of a heart attack. And in exchange for a blood sacrifice, and of course a hefty fee, Neville could send Winston to somebody's enemy and cause that person to meet a similar fate. Elizabeth wanted nothing to do with Neville's Obeah or with Neville himself at this point. She had started a small catering business out of her own kitchen, making beef patties, rice and peas, curried goat, and other Caribbean delicacies in order to save money so that she could leave him. As she cooked, she recited psalms and sang church hymns to keep the unholy spirit that occupied her kitchen at bay. She would tell her husband, "You think it's giving you power, but you're nothing but a slave, and you will pay the price." He laughed at her and said dismissively, "Old Winston is making us rich." Elizabeth thought, yeah, if we're rich, why haven't I seen any money? But she knew it wasn't worth starting an argument. Neville offered regular blood sacrifices to Winston. Elizabeth would come home to find chickens and goats slaughtered in her kitchen and soup tureens filled with blood and other offerings at the foot of the malignant altar. The walls and floors were splattered with blood, which Neville expected her to clean. She refused to cook with the meat left over from the sacrifices, knowing that it was tainted with evil. Despite the absurdity of her kitchen turning into an abattoir, Elizabeth could not deny the fact that Neville's evil magic was efficacious, and more people were seeking his services. Neville would spend hours each night drinking rum and presenting gigantic feasts to Winston while in a trance-like state, begging the villainous spirit to do his bidding. Elizabeth could feel the gathering darkness encroaching on their home and lives, and it filled her with a sense of impending doom. One day, while Elizabeth was cooking, she felt a chilling presence and the room darkened, despite the fact that it was noon on a bright spring day. She turned to find a short man wearing a tuxedo and top hat, standing behind her completely still with a ghastly grin spread across his face. She knew that it was Winston, or rather the demon that called himself as such. She was not fearful, but filled with anger at the evil Duppy that dared to take up residence in her home, and at her worthless husband who had invited it in. She began to recite the 23rd Psalm from the Bible, and Winston evanesced into a smoky mist at the sound of the holy words.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures.
Elizabeth had finally had enough. She grabbed the money she had saved and asked a woman that she had befriended in the city if she could stay with her until she got on her feet. Her new friend readily agreed and admitted that she had long been concerned for Elizabeth's well-being. Later that night, once safely out of the apartment, Elizabeth called Neville and spoke the last words that she would ever say to him. She told him that their marriage was over and that he needed to change his ways or he would succumb to the evil to which he had become enslaved. Neville laughed and hung up the phone. A few weeks later, a former neighbor contacted Elizabeth and told her of a tragic event. While conducting one of his late-night rituals, the refrigerator fell on Neville, crushing his skull and killing him instantly. The building super found him lying lifeless in a pool of his own cold, congealed blood in front of the Obeah altar. Elizabeth knew immediately what had happened. The wicked Duppy had become so bloodthirsty that it came to claim the final sacrifice, Neville himself. Upon returning to the apartment to collect some of her personal belongings, Elizabeth found hidden under a loose floorboard 100,000 Canadian dollars, which Neville had received as payment from his clients. At first, she was reluctant to take the ill-gotten money, but in the end, she decided that it could do a lot of good. She made a large donation to a local homeless shelter, and the rest she used to grow her catering business, which prospered. Today, Elizabeth lives a comfortable life in retirement and maintains homes in both Canada and Jamaica. The account of Neville's obsession with Winston and the consequences thereof serves as a reminder of the seductive and addicting powers of evil spirits, and that engaging with such entities does not come without a price. Whereas Elizabeth's happy ending is proof that blessings come to those who walk in the light and practice kindness. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's episode. If you'd like to share a personal vampire encounter, send an email to thenightvisitorsvrs@gmail.com, and please visit the website for the Night Visitors Vampire Research Society at thenightvisitors.com. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the world.